your host and the consumer quarterback.
All right, we got our friend Matt DiMaio back in the house. He's a AKA memory expert, eliminating procrastination and overwhelm. Tell me a little bit about it.
You know, let me ask you a question. Do you suppose that a lot of people in your audience deal with procrastination or feelings of being overwhelmed by too much going on in their lives?
Yeah, we're sensory overload these days, so absolutely.
Absolutely. You know, it's become one of the most, procrastination is perhaps one of the most common, one of the most natural, but also one of the most detrimental problems that people are faced with. So what I want to talk about here is what causes you to procrastinate and some easy, simple steps that a person can immediately employ to overcome it in the first place.
Why don't we talk about it later? You get it?
You know, somebody said to me, he said, I'm not an amateur procrastinator, I'm a pro.
Yeah, there you go. I'm a pro at it. Yeah, absolutely. So procrastination, that's an interesting topic, especially, you know, Brian Tracy put out a book called Eat That Frog or something to those effects, you know, meaning like take on the biggest thing that I don't want to do this task. Eat the frog early in the day, right? You know, eat that frog, get it over with. Like, don't procrastinate.
You know, I have almost an opposite viewpoint on the subject,
okay.
and I'll talk about exactly what I mean by that. But let's talk about first what causes somebody to procrastinate. What causes you to do it? Mm-hmm. And I believe that the number one reason for procrastination is that you expect to have an unpleasant outcome.
Yeah, pain.
Because think about it. Think about it this way, from the opposite point of view. If you're a salesperson and you're procrastinating by calling back that prospect, or you're a student and you don't want to write the term paper, or you don't feel like sitting down to study, or you want to go on a date but you're afraid to call that cutie that you had your eye on.
Yep.
However, flip the script and say, well, what if when you wrote that term paper you knew for sure that you were going to blow your professor's mind? Or that prospect was going to go, yeah, I not only love what you're selling, I can't wait to buy it, but I've got referrals for you.
Right.
Would you have a different attitude?
Absolutely.
Or if you knew that hottie you were interested in couldn't wait to go out with you as well,
right,
you wouldn't procrastinate. So what people do is they're trying to avoid the pain of that imaginary problem that they may be facing.
Right.
And that's just a question of getting your thoughts in the right order.
They're building it up in their mind.
Absolutely. The picture that they're seeing is one with an unpleasant outcome. And so that's a choice that you make. And now I really can't control what choices people make, but I want you to be aware of it, that it is a deliberate choice. And once you realize that you're choosing that, you can choose to think of other things, or you can choose to look at the glasses being half full, or look at it on a more positive basis.
Yeah.
But let's talk about one of the issues that people have with feeling overwhelmed. You know, they have too much to do, not enough time to do it.
Yes.
And one of the things that I want to point out is that something that almost nobody else that I've ever heard of talks about. You've probably heard people tell you that you can have everything you want in life. But you have hardly ever talk about people that tell you you can't have... I've actually got it backwards here.
Well, I've heard the Tony Robbins thing.
You can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want.
Right. Okay. Anything you want versus everything you want.
Well, think about it this way. You can go and you can accomplish all sorts of tremendous feats. You can accomplish anything that you want. In your case, you take a look at just what you've been able to do with Keller Williams. I heard you talk about over $2 billion in sales last year.
Yep.
Now, when you first got started, that was maybe a dream of being able to do that much. So, but you can't have everything. For example, if I know that you in college you were a great quarterback and that you loved playing football. If you got an opportunity to be drafted by the pros right now, you would go, wow, it would be interesting.
Yeah.
But you can't really turn around and do that. You can do anything you want. You had the opportunity to do that, but you can't do everything. In my own life, for example.
Right.
About 8 years ago, I got invited to play keyboards in a band that was forming to resurrect the careers of 3 formerly famous rock musicians.
Cool.
But I was in my early 60s. My daughter was in middle school. I had a 6-figure corporate job. I couldn't be a dad raising my daughter at home,
right,
and being on the road. Now, the way I handled the anything, that was the everything part, trying to do,
right,
go on the road. Couldn't do that. But you had come to see me perform a couple of times,
yeah.
And so I've been able to open for many different national acts as a keyboard player, and so you can have anything, you just can't have everything. So you've got to find the seasons.
Power of focus.
So the way to do that is to make a written list of what it is that you're looking to accomplish. When you see things in writing,
yes,
you're forcing yourself to have these imaginary thoughts appear in the concrete world. And now you can look down your list with a highlighter and actually make some choices.
Yeah, there's something powerful that happens when you bring it from your mind through your hand onto the paper, and there's a magical, something out there in the ether, and the power of focus, as you mentioned before too. The power of focus is so huge because if you chunk that down, if you're overwhelmed, what you do is you break it down. Tony calls it chunking. You chunk it down into certain results driven. Okay, what's the result of this? Spending time with my family is going to lead to that. And then the other thing I wrote down is the law of momentum, because once you get started, once you eat that frog or you start that task that you're kind of putting off, what you find is that, wow, this is fun sometimes, or hey, I've got momentum here.
You really hit the nail on the head with what you just said there. What stops you is the ability to get started.
Right.
If you can find a way to get started. But now, going back to what we were talking about by doing that big thing,
yes,
that'll stop people. So my advice is the opposite of that, and that is to do the simplest thing first.
Okay.
For example,
yep,
let's say you have a big term paper to write. I know that a lot of the people out there have kids that are in high school, college, middle school, and they have these term papers they've got to write, and they're putting them off.
Yep.
Because it's a big process. So if, instead of trying to sit down and write a term paper, if what you did was just make a list of all of the points that you want to make in that paper.
Right.
And you start with this, okay, you don't even have to have them in the right order. I want to cover this, I want to cover that. Oh yeah, I also want to cover this other thing. The same thing if you've got too many subjects to study or too many tasks. Like, for example, a lot of students have too many subjects that they need to study for, and they get jammed up and they're not willing to study for anything.
Yep.
My suggestion is pick one subject.
Yeah.
The easiest one. And then, rather than trying to dig into the details of that subject, use some of the techniques that I teach on some of my YouTube videos where I talk to people about how to absorb textbooks like a sponge, and that is give yourself previews of each page. So you're not even going to dig into the content. You're going to flip through the pages in the book and start the process. For people who exercise, you may not want to go on a 5-mile run. You may be resisting it. Start by taking a walk, running a few steps.
Exactly.
And then, once you start running a few steps, you go, hey, it's not as bad as I thought, and you're more motivated to do it. So my advice is always, start with the simplest thing first so that you can begin the process of momentum and overcome that blockage.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot of times when I'm exercising, that's what I do. I walk, jog. I'll run, walk, jog, run, mix it up that way. And check them out online, folks. YouTube.com, Be Smarter Faster. YouTube.com/Be Smarter Faster. And IncredibleMemory.com. Matt DiMaio. More coming up with Matt on the flip side of this break. All right, we got Matt DiMaio in studio here, memory expert, eliminating procrastination and overwhelm, and IncredibleMemory.com. What else did you want to talk about, Matt?
There's something called writing therapy. These days, more and more people, have feelings of anxiety or stress or feeling overwhelmed with things. And that's because they're keeping everything inside.
Yeah.
When you write stuff out, a different process begins to happen. And let me put it in terms that it's easy to understand. Let's say that I gave you a long column of figures to add. Well, when you do it on paper, you have a very clear answer. If you try to do that arithmetic in your head, it's a lot more difficult. Now, the interesting thing about arithmetic is that there is one clear right or wrong answer.
Right.
That's not the way it works in life. In life, we're dealing with calculus. You're dealing with lots of different shades of answers. So just as it is important or helpful to write down your arithmetic or your math problems so that you can look at what you're trying to come up with the answer to, it's even more important to do that with the problems that we have in life, because now you can see the different shades of right or wrong for you, and you can make your priorities. So let's talk about the feelings of overwhelm. You have too many projects to do, too much stuff to do, not enough time to do it. Well, I mentioned do the simplest thing first, but that doesn't get everything on your list done.
Right.
And as I pointed out, you may not be able to get everything on your list done. So what you need to do is, once you have your list, and figure out what are the things on that list that are the must-dos.
Right.
Because sometimes people wind up multitasking. And they're trying to do 3 and 4 different things at the same time. And I got to tell you, that adds to your feeling of overwhelm.
Yeah.
Your mind is not built to deal with multitasking. The front part of your brain, the frontal lobe. The frontal cortex is very good at dealing with a few projects simultaneously for a short amount of time. However, the main brain, the core brain, when you're doing a lot of projects at once, it becomes like a photocopier with a paper jam. The machine is going like crazy. Nothing's coming out. Nothing's getting done. Everything is jammed up inside.
Yeah.
And that really will lead to stress. It leads to feelings of depression. It leads to feelings of, oh, why bother? I'm going to quit, or just avoiding the process altogether. And people wind up, when they're multitask, you can frequently walk away feeling worse than if you had done nothing at all.
You know what it reminds me of too, Matt, is I think it was Stephen Covey who wrote these lists of urgent and important, urgent but not important, important but not urgent, so prioritizing. And then what Tony also talks about is when you align these things, you'll notice that if you put them arrange them around principles or around key tasks or projects, then you can eliminate some of the things, because these two actually meant the same thing: spend more time with family or whatever it might be.
Excellent points. Yeah. Excellent points. And as you go through the process of writing these things down, it gives you a level of clarity, and it actually gives you a level of peace. It reduces your anxiety. The other thing that sometimes people do is they try to please everybody.
Yes.
And that's the reason that I mentioned earlier about the fact that you can do anything you want,
yes,
but you can't do everything you want.
Right.
You can't go through life trying to please everybody and wind up frustrating yourself and getting little done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a challenge, and what happens is you'll build once you do these things and you establish that momentum in your mind, and you get the organization down and you get the pattern. Now you've got that going forward. So it'll take you from your middle school years to your high school years. So I think it all starts with having that base of knowledge and how to attack certain situations.
I'm glad to hear you talk about that, because this is something that parents can do for their kids that are in middle school before they start going to high school, is to help them create these personality patterns where, when they're challenged with an overwhelming amount of schoolwork, to write out what it is that they need to do, attack the simplest part first, get in the flow, because those type of personality traits will see you through the more difficult days in high school, and certainly in college and university.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like your work ethic, polishing and sharpening the saw is a key part of it, I think. And it also reminds me of, youth football, even going back to like youth football, Pop Warner, we played in the national championship. My dad was the coach, but a lot of it was just that discipline that we had, and just knowing that, and the motivation is key too. He was a great motivator, but the discipline of, getting there early, being ready for start practice on time. If you didn't get your homework done, you don't get to practice. You got to sit on the side and watch everybody else practice and do your homework. Like having that discipline in place. And yes, there's a certain level of consequences, so you got the carrot and the stick, in these situations. But yeah, I think that's going to make you a well-balanced person, student or an adult.
Absolutely. A lot of times people talk about the concept of balance, and it's a tricky subject. In a future episode, I will be talking about how to establish better work, life, school type of a balance.
Yes.
But I think that what happens for a lot of people is they try and balance everything at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's where they go wrong. Instead of understanding that in life, it is natural and probably better to go through seasons. Just like you have certain sports seasons. You don't have football all year long.
Right.
And so sometimes you need to be in a season where you're working harder than you're dealing with family. And sometimes you need to be in a season where you're dealing with family stuff more than you are with work stuff.
Yeah, because that makes sense. Holidays, typically the real estate business slows down a little bit. Okay, let's schedule more family stuff that time. Seasonally appropriate advice. Reminds me also when I wrote my books. I've written 3 books. I remember before I was an author, I was like, man, how am I going to do this? It's so much effort and time, and how do I organize the chapters? Well, what I did is I worked with a ghostwriter. I took 1 hour a week. So there you go. So you got all these hours in a week. 86,400 seconds in a day, and how many hours, right? So you have all these hours, but hey, just take 1 hour a week and work on XYZ, right?
And like you talked about, you're doing something manageable that does not make you feel overwhelmed.
Yes.
That you don't have a feeling of, oh, gee, it's not going to come out well at the end.
Right.
And like when you're training your salespeople, one of the biggest problems that salespeople have is that they don't follow up with a prospect after making the presentation.
There's fortune in the follow-up.
Follow up. When you think you're done following up, follow up. And the reason that they don't follow up is they're expecting the prospect to be annoyed with them because they followed up, or that they're going to hear a negative response, or that they're going to hear no or a rejection of their proposal.
Yep.
Well, that is a mental game more than it is a physical one.
Right.
That's not a game of skill. That's just a mental game that you need to get in control of.
So, Matt, your website, AnIncredibleMemory.com?
Yes, I have a video training course to teach people how to remember everything and anything that you want.
All right. Hey, that was some good stuff today, man. I appreciate you bringing that in. And I'm sure our listeners out there, the audience, will appreciate that. YouTube.com, Be Smarter Faster. And we want you to please go out there and consider committing a random act of kindness. Do something kind for one another. Be a force for good in the community. Remember, that small act of kindness can go a long way in the life of someone else. Have a blessed day. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to The Consumer Quarterback, Brandon Rhymes. Whether it's real estate, consumer, or financial advice, let Brandon call your next play. Call Brandon Rhymes at 813-917-1894. That's 813-917-1894. Online at consumerqb.com. And join us next time for The Consumer Quarterback Show.